All right. Well, I guess we have started now. Let me introduce myself. I am Lawrence Pasternak, professor of philosophy at OSU, and I am the director of the Religious Studies program. The goal today basically is to discuss issues of worship, liturgical questions, outreach activities related to houses of worship in this, shall we say, new COVIDian world. What I'm basically going to do is I'm going to introduce our panelists and then hand things over to our Master of Ceremonies for tonight. Some of you are joining via Zoom. Some of you will be watching on the ostate.tv link. Those of you who are on Zoom, you have the opportunity to ask us questions. And let me request that you do so by way of the chat function. So rather than verbally speaking your question, type it into the chat, and then Adam Sultani can then go through those questions and then pose them to our panelists as we move along. So let me move on. Our panelists include Dr. Imam Imad Inshasi, who is the president and senior imam of the Islamic Society of Greater Oklahoma City. He is also associate professor of Islamic studies at Oklahoma City University. Rabbi Vered Harris, formerly the education rabbi at the Congregation Beth Torah at Overland Park, Kansas, and has been the chief rabbi of Temple B'nai Israel in Oklahoma City since 2012. And Reverend Shannon Fleck, ordained by the Disciples of Christ, formerly the associate minister of the Central Christian Church in Enid, and since June 2018, she has been the executive director of the Oklahoma Conference of Churches. Our moderator is Adam Sultani, who is the executive director of the Council on American Islamic Relations in Oklahoma. And he has also recently joined our religious studies program as an adjunct instructor of Islamic studies. So without further ado, let me move forward and pass things over to Adam Sultani.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Pasternak. Lovely to be here this evening and to be hosting this amazing conversation during challenging times with some faith leaders, some outstanding faith leaders here in the state. And, you know, I don't like to do introductions, and I know Dr. Pasternak introduced you all briefly, but I think I'd rather turn it over to each one of you to kind of just introduce yourselves and talk about what you do more or less on a practical level. So we'll start with you, Reverend Fleck, and then Imam Inshasi, and then Rabbi Harris in that order.
Okay, well, hello, everybody. I'm Shannon Fleck, Executive Director of the Oklahoma Conference of Churches. As mentioned, our website, if you've never heard of us, is okchurches.org, so check us out. But we're an ecumenical organization that works with 16 different Christian denominations throughout the state of Oklahoma. And we provide unity work, education, resources to those denominations. But a key aspect of what we do is, as Christians and as a Christian organization, we focus and prioritize relationships with our interfaith neighbors. And so that is a key part of our
My name is Imad Inshasi. I am the senior imam of the Islamic Society of Greater Oklahoma City, and also the chair of Islamic study at Oklahoma City University. A professor slash clergy, for the lack of term, where I try to bring scholastic knowledge and religious knowledge to merge into an interfaith a studio, so to speak. I teach world religions at the university and try to teach my students the respect of not necessarily theologically agree, but to respect and perhaps have some what are called spiritual envy from one another. On the Imam level, trying to outreach to as many platforms as we can. We also run an Islamic school and also Mercy Mission Building, which is a food pantry, a women resource center, a free clinic, a soup kitchen, and you name it. We volunteer and we actually join hands with many other organizations. I just came actually from there as us and the St. Luke's United Methodist Church have joined forces on Wednesday, and we've given meals every single day. Hundreds of people come in every single day to be served. We are here to humble ourselves to our neighbor, to perhaps lately try to explain the misconception about the Islamic faith, and to basically understand that there's only one race, that is the human race.
My name is Reverend Harris, and it is always an honor and a privilege to be able to spend time with Adam and with Reverend Fleck and with Imam and Chassi. And so thank you very much, Dr. Pasternak, for bringing us all together this evening. I'm the rabbi at Temple B'nai Israel in Oklahoma City, and our particular congregation focuses on providing opportunities for people who are interested in Torah or Jewish learning, in worship, and in providing or in performing acts of loving kindness, particularly through the lens of what's called Reform Judaism, which is just one expression of the many kinds of ways that people act on their Jewishness in the world. So in terms of what I do, I teach, I lead services, and when I'm lucky, I get to engage with my Temple family in acts of loving kindness, and also pastoral and spiritual care.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you all for those amazing introductions. And I think now it's a good time to segue into one of the first questions we have, which is, with all the amazing work that the three of you do, how is it possible to continue this work in the age of COVID? I mean, things are shut down. Things have moved to a virtual world as we are right now. And so maybe we'll start with, we'll go backwards this time. Rabbi Harris, we can start with you, and then Imam, because Shannon, I know, Reverend Fleck, that you don't lead a congregation, but rather you work with a lot of congregations. So we can start with the Jewish and Muslim communities and then go to the Christian community after that.
Sure. Well, we took a look at what we consider to be some of our critical functions when it became clear to us that meeting in large gatherings was not going to be advisable. And actually, I think that we were amongst the first congregations in the city to say, we're not meeting this week. So we've been virtual since March 13th, I think. And we said, what are our critical functions? Our critical functions are back to those same 3 points: Torah, or Jewish study; Avodah, which is worship; and Gemilut Chasadim, acts of kindness. So how do we take those critical functions and put them in an online world? So our worship services are all now online. We have moved all of our classes to an online format. And in that regard, we've had to do some tweaking, and we're not going to have we have chosen not to have our students in Hebrew school for an hour and a half in front of a screen and all one big plop. So we adjusted some things to make that a little different. And then we've also looked at ways that we can participate in some of the acts of kindness around the city. So we're still participating with the Homeless Alliance, but it's taking creativity for people to be making meals in their homes that then get picked up and shuttled around. And we have several members who have gotten involved with 405 mask makers. So still looking out at what's going on in our larger community and how can we be involved. We are very serious and very committed to the idea of people wearing masks, people keeping their physical distance. Funerals over Zoom is not the way that anybody wants to mourn their loved ones or comfort one another, but it is our reality. So every day I'm honestly grateful and thankful that in this moment in time, we have the technology to be able to continue to connect at least this way, even if we can't be together.
Wow, wow, that's powerful, and yeah, it definitely is a challenge. Imam, how has the Muslim community dealt with this challenge? Because I know not only has there been the adjustment, as Rabbi Harris mentioned, with the onset of coronavirus, but also moving into the holy month of Ramadan, that presents an even more difficult challenge, because that's a time of increased worship for the Muslim community. And in addition to 5 daily prayers in a mosque, you have the additional night prayers that people have typically come praying for about 2 hours each night of the month of Ramadan. So could you talk about that a little bit, please?
Oh, absolutely. Just like the rabbi have said, we were also one of the fewer people actually closed much earlier than others, because there's a lot involved in a mosque. There is a common carpet that everybody uses. There is an ablution wash area which everybody uses. And not only that, according to the Islamic tradition, Islamic law, there are these laws that govern us, which, besides also common sense and so on and so forth. So we were the first one to suspend our Friday prayers. Moving into the holy month of Ramadan, again, focusing on prayers, charity, and Ramadan. Those are 3 pillars out of our 5 pillars of Islam. Everything became semi-virtual. So we still have a Friday sermon virtual, where we come on and, perhaps all of us could relate. I hope I don't cry, but to preach to an empty congregation. There's nobody there. It's a different feeling, but nevertheless, you start looking at the screen and you have hundreds of people watching you. Try to see the positive in that, in a sense that we went global, so to speak. I used to have maybe 15, 20, the max I have maybe 100 something students, but now you have thousands that they're coming and listening to you. But nevertheless, a lot of things went virtual. So the prayer, we still pray 5 times a day alone, maybe one more person with me. And then the sermons, the Friday sermons went virtual. Having said that, our food pantry is probably one of the few that we decided that it's going to stay open, especially during the peak of the corona. And what's so beautiful about that is the simple fact that people from the Jewish community and people from the Christian community, that they have some of their food pantries closed, they came and joined forces with us and helped with us as well. They came to help. Again, we have to change, people wearing masks. We have to deliver the food to people's cars, but we're serving hundreds of people. Our pharmacy is open for medicine, and all our social services are still working. People helping people with rent and in this very, very hard time. And as I said, we're taking, we're joining forces with whomever one has joined forces with us in order to help our fellow Oklahoman. Ramadan is a month where even the congregation grows. So even we have 5 daily prayers, which makes it extremely difficult, even with the idea of opening. I don't know if we're going to go to that subject, but with the idea of opening our places of worship, there's a lot more involved in a service. We had 9 funerals, and also the funerals are very involved. Early on, there's a ritualistic bathing for the deceased and so on and so forth. We could not do that for a couple of services, and we tried to lessen the impact of people coming together by asking people to actually limit the numbers. So it was also very hard to tell people, just the closest of the family could come to the sermon. We did not have sermon in the mosque. We had sermons either at the funeral home, or the sermons took place at the burial site as well. Overall, Ramadan nights are going well with the late prayers and virtual reminder every single night. I think people need to be spiritually connected with their congregation during those difficult times, and we're focusing on spirituality and uplifting the human spirit as we maintain our social relevancy within the community.
Beautiful, beautiful. And Reverend Fleck, I know, currently in your position with the Oklahoma Conference of Churches, you don't lead a congregation, but you do have that experience having previously served as an associate minister. So, based upon that, can you kind of talk a little bit about what you know of what Christian congregations throughout Oklahoma City and the state are going through in dealing with, virtual services? And you can, if you want to, go ahead and talk about the move to reopen possibly churches very soon. You could, because I know that was actually a specific point that Governor Stitt mentioned recently. It kind of bothers me that he mentioned churches, I think, in the general sense, rather than specifying religious institutions. But since he did, maybe you would like to speak about that a little bit as well.
Sure. And really my position now with the Conference of Churches not serving a specific congregation has afforded me an opportunity to take kind of this 10,000 level view of what our faith leaders are going through, what our denominational leaders are going through, and really act as a support system for those people. So I actually recorded kind of a cheerleader video earlier for our faith leaders, because they are just doing incredible things, incredible, creative, innovative things to serve their communities. And honestly, we did not learn in our theological education how to pastor during a pandemic. There was no class on how to do this. I'm fairly confident that's across the board. I can't think of any theological schools that have covered that, or rabbinic schools. I mean, this is not something that is taught to faith leaders. And so honestly, what we're seeing in every faith are our leaders having to move on a dime to make decisions, to all of a sudden become technical experts, to all of a sudden learn software and technology and how to implement it, but then also implement it to where it's still meaningful and engaging and impactful. And that's very difficult. As the Imam mentioned, rightfully so, with emotion. None of us want to stand in front of our empty sanctuaries and preach a sermon. That is not, that is one of the hardest things, to sit in front of your own camera with none of your people in front of you and be authentic and sincere, and to have that holiness that just kind of naturally flows when you're in the presence of your people. So that is a challenge that's real. Our clergy and our leaders are meeting that challenge so beautifully. And it's different. Every church is different. Every faith leader has a different style. Every person engages that differently. Some do live recordings, some pre-record. It's really what works for the individual church and the individual leader, because we're all different with different skills. But I do want to second my cheerleading video from earlier and just say that you are all doing sensational work. And that's not just the Christians, that's every faith leader who is navigating something that no one taught us how to navigate. And you're providing spiritual care to your people, and you're showing up, and it's so important. And if no one has told you, you're doing a great job. So I'll end that there. As far as reopening, I think a big concern is that when Governor Stitt threw out a date, a lot of people might interpret that as a green light. And I think that is a concern that we as an organization have, and a concern that we share with a lot of organizations and a lot of individuals. And when it comes to Christian churches and reopening, there's not going to be a one-size-fits-all approach that works for every single church, right? when we look at the CDC guidelines, which is what we're recommending congregations and faith communities do, is to keep an eye on those CDC guidelines as decisions start to get made. Start having the conversation now, even if you're not going to reopen for a month or two. It's important to begin to gauge that. Everything is going to look different. We need to be looking to our denominational leadership. And I can say that OCC has been gathering our denominational leaders for resource sharing, to be in conversation with one another about what we're thinking and what things look like. I can say that the majority of the conversations I've had with the Christian community is that May is way too soon, and they will be planning for something post-May at the earliest. Is that the right decision or wrong decision? I'm not getting into that, but the primary source of decision making should always be the health and safety of our people.
Yeah.
When we cancel services, when there's 2 inches of ice on the road, faith leaders struggle with the decision to cancel our services. It is such a gut-wrenching decision. And that's for the health and safety of our people.
Right.
Now times that by this global pandemic, and we are still walking that care to where our people are first and foremost. And I think that's a consensus that I have heard pretty much across the board when it comes to reopening, is that if it's not safe for our people to be here, then we're not doing it. Yeah.
Makes sense. Absolutely does make sense. And you brought up a good point, is that, you know, there are, whether it be national organizations or, as you mentioned, denominational authorities that are guiding different communities. And I've read a lot of the feedback from different organizations and such that, you know, it's really looking at that, you know, the health of the communities is the most important. But perhaps Rabbi Harris and Imam and Chasi, if you could maybe talk a little bit about what you're seeing from your leadership on a national level with the Jewish and Muslim communities, that would be nice for our viewers to hear as well.
Sure. I've been so grateful to be a part of the reform movement of Judaism during all of this. I'm not familiar with what the other movements are doing, but within Reform Judaism, we have seen offered to our congregations things like new prayers that have been written and created for this time, whether those are for communities and in general, to prayers specifically for medical providers, scientists, researchers, and essential workers. We have seen statements, for instance, in Judaism, there are certain prayers that we're supposed to have 10 people together. It's called a minyan. We're supposed to have a M-I-N-Y-A-N, not a minion like a little yellow guy. So we're supposed to have a minyan together for certain prayers. And this has always been understood as 10 Jewish people over the age of 13 who are together in one space. Well, what do you do about having this minyan if we're virtual? And so a new statement that was released that explains religious guidelines around a virtual minyan, essentially. Our movement early on in March, end of March, released a statement that was very strongly worded, saying we really don't want our leaders live streaming from their physical building or their physical congregation, even if it is to an empty congregation, which is what we had been doing for the 2 or 3 weeks prior to that. They said I don't remember if these are their words or my words, but our prayers are essential. Where we are is not. Wow. So in modeling, they've put out things almost every day, it feels like, guidelines, hints, and then of course all of our national rabbinic groups that are on social media and such have been a tremendous amount of support, guidance. I will add to that, the trick comes in acknowledging that we are in different parts of the country. So there's a very large Jewish community in New York. And New York has suffered so tremendously. And my colleagues in New York who are who have been facing many, many COVID-related deaths and having to do those funerals are simply in a different emotional and spiritual space than I am here, with a different reality in terms of how it's impacting on the day-to-day my members and the Jewish community here in Oklahoma. So we are gathering, but we've had tremendous leadership, and a lot of that, if viewers are interested, a lot of that information is on reformjudaism.org, and people can go and look for themselves some of the resources that are available.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you. That was very insightful. Imam, any feedback as far as like national organizations for the Muslim community trying to navigate these waters in this challenging time?
Well, we actually part of the Islamic Society of North America, and Islamic Society of North America and North American Imam Federation. They've been extremely helpful from day one, from their instructions to when we should close, which we did earlier than anyone else, and also their instructions on day-to-day basis. Again, navigating through some traditional texts and tradition of the Prophet. We had this before through the plague, so we have something legalistic to rely on. Our call for prayers has been changed, and because it has been changed, 7th century when the plague hit. Normally we say, come to prayer, come to success. And now our call for prayer say, pray at home, pray where you're at. And we could safely say that. And our national leadership actually reminded us of these particular fatwas or rulings, Islamic rulings, from our tradition. People are emotional, so people want to come and be associated with the mosque. The biggest part is trying to actually shut down Friday prayers throughout the city with the mandate from the national organization. And again, the local imam have a lot of I don't want to say the word power, but a lot of say so in what's happening. I've seen people trying to open a Friday congregation in their little shops, and I have to speak to them individually. But nationally, has been a lot of support that's coming from the Muslim Medical Association as well, trying to describe and explain to us why it is important to not congregate at this time. Also, national fundraisers for food pantries. We had many grants for our food pantries for national organizations such as Islamic Relief. Of course, CAIR-Oklahoma and CAIR National has been continuously connecting us with our elected officials, and it's been really a tremendous amount of support. We still don't have the ruling on virtual prayers, that can people actually pray behind the imam while he's praying at the mosque, but the people are understanding. Ramadan comes and people wanted the mosque is open. We just sent an email a couple of days ago that the mosque will not be open, but we're still carrying on the traditional breakfast meal where people could pick up their meals from different places. We're still carrying on family counseling through Zoom. Perhaps this is a blessing to do family counseling over Zoom, because I always tell the people I only have 40 minutes. Whoops, sorry. This is my free Zoom. 40 minutes is completely gone. Before that, where they get you in the room, they could talk to you for 2-3 hours. I'm just trying to make some humor here, give some humor there. But we're still doing a lot of things via Zoom, and our national organization basically have advised us not to open. As Rabbi Vered said, yes, the emotions are different from imams in New York, where 192 Muslims so far have passed away in New York. we have 7 here in Oklahoma City, but none of them from the coronavirus. So I know the emotions are different and the feelings are different from New York to Oklahoma, but safety still be our utmost concern. In particular, when the governor sent this blanket guidelines about worship places for social distancing, taking people's temperature, and sanitizing after each services. We have 5 daily services, and Ramadan, my Friday prayers, 1,000 people. Who am I going to allow in and out, and how can those people congregate safely? So preventing harm take precedent under Islamic law over bringing benefits. So we're preventing the harm by not congregating. But as the rabbi also eloquently said, places matter not. As long as you're connected with God, your heart is connected with God, you're connected with God.
Well said. And Rabbi, did you have something you wanted to add?
Well, so I should have said earlier, Ramadan Mubarak, and hearing you talk about Ramadan makes me think about also, we went through Passover just as our Christian neighbors went through Easter. And one of the really wonderful things for me as somebody who sometimes feels a little isolated being Jewish in Oklahoma City was a international broadcast that was put out on YouTube for a Saturday night Seder during Passover. And it was fun, and it was serious, and it was poignant, and it was all of those things. But the biggest thing that it was for me was a connection to Jewish people all over the world that honestly I've never had during Passover before. It's always been with my family, with my community, and here, which is wonderful, and I'm excited one day to have it back. But feeling so connected with Jewish people all over the year, or all over the world in that moment, was just really special. And I think that there are some very positive, soul nourishing aspects of technology and what we're able to do right now.
Well,
there's a divine wisdom in everything. My wife loves it, the idea that I'm breaking fast with her and the kids every single night, and I'm here with them, versus, she reminded me that for 15 years, I have not broken fast with her. So, right after we finish this here, there's going to be running to the kitchen, preparing the dinner for tonight.
That's no exaggeration. I have witnessed that from the Imam. So yeah, it is indeed a blessing. I mean, ironically, before all this happened, my wife and I were talking about how busy we were. We weren't having enough time with our kids. So the blessing of family and having some more time for not only family, but also for worship and for connecting with God and for spending time in religious study has turned out to be something on the good side of things. And Reverend Fleck, since we were talking about, Ramadan and Passover, could you kind of maybe mention how you observed the Christian community in Oklahoma partaking in Easter? Because I know there was some controversy with some churches in different parts of the country insisting on holding Easter services. But in Oklahoma, I observed that people were doing it in different manners. I saw pictures on social media, but perhaps you're more intimately aware of how people chose to observe Easter this year in the community.
There, of course, was a lot of grief. We're all grieving the loss of our physical worship spaces, and that's natural. And, when our president announced that he wanted the country back by Easter, I think there, for some, was a collective disappointment in that was our goal. That was what we were aiming for. And when that didn't happen or could not happen safely, there was another round of grief and another round of disappointment. For me, I loved being able to experience Easter worship in all of these different communities. I am lucky if I can make it to one worship community a week to visit. I have never felt more connected to the faith leaders of Oklahoma than during this time, because I'm truly getting to engage. And the worship I experienced on Easter was uplifting. And the clergy I heard acknowledged the grief, acknowledged how hard this is, but that Jesus rises anyway. And that is central to our belief system, is that no matter what, the tomb was empty. And that ties back into just my pride that I have for the faith leaders of the state, really taking this in stride. I think public comments about end dates for when we can come back from our leaders, specifically political leaders, does not help. It does not help the leaders of our state make those decisions, because then there's an added pressure, right? So we're thinking in terms of a due date rather than the health and safety of our people. I don't think that's helpful. I don't think that helped with Easter one bit. However, I experienced it as a beautiful, meaningful day.
Well said. And you brought up a good point. I mean, although realistically speaking, this probably never would happen, but had the president said that, we would be back to reopening everything by the start of Ramadan, I could imagine, the emotional feeling that Muslims would go through, or start of Passover for that matter, the emotional feeling that the community would go through, thinking, oh yeah, this is the turning point. And it's also tied into a huge religious celebration or a commemorative moment, and then it doesn't happen. So it's like double whammy. You feel that. Since we're talking about congregations in relation to worship services and these very important times in each of these different communities, let's touch on how your congregations and your community members are dealing with this, because I think that's very important. As a Muslim, I've observed those emotional challenges people go through and the struggle people go through, where they just can't, deal with the fact that they can't go to the mosque. And I've heard people like Imam and Chasi speak out and say, our religion is not tied to the mosque. Our religion is tied to God. Therefore, we don't stop worshiping just because we can't go to the mosque. But I don't want to say too much, but maybe if we could start with Rabbi Harris, and then go down the list and just kind of talk about how your congregation is dealing with all of the changes.
Sure. I think each individual person and family is dealing with it in their own way. We instituted something that we call Good Morning TBI, Boker Tov TBI. So Sunday through Friday at 8:30 in the morning, we have an online Zoom check-in that members can come to, because we saw early on that for some people, why should I even bother getting out of bed today, right? I'm not going to do anything. And we wanted to have a time for us to have a goal first thing in the morning, not a full prayer service, but simply here's a prayer, a thought for the day, a song. And the music director and I alternate doing that. And we've gotten really positive responses for that. And we have people who, in the beginning, there were a lot of people who showed up, and now we're down to kind of our regulars, and what that tells us is that people, what I interpret that to mean is that people are finding their balance and people are finding their way. And I won't call this a new normal, because I don't think that this is normal, but a new routine and pattern. Sure. So people are responding. We have more logins, I guess, or people who are watching our live streamed Friday night service. So attendance, I guess you could say, is up. Good. And we've gotten a lot of feedback from people that they appreciate the live stream, and that they hope that once we start integrating back into our building, that we'll continue to do it, because we have people who are watching us now from California and Kansas and Texas and New York and all over the country. So that's been meaningful for people. We certainly have some people who have felt even despondent, especially people who are extroverts and people who are go out and do kind of people. And that's a big challenge for individuals. At the same time, we have people who are more homebodies who have expressed thoughts like, it's great. I mean, I'm good, right? So everybody's dealing with it in their own way. And the key for us as we start thinking about summer is to start thinking about what kinds of experiences can we offer that will be special, that will be in person, that will be helpful for connecting on the human level, even as a large part of our community may stay to some degree online.
Understood. Wow. Yeah, no, I can see how, I mean, there is a segment of the population that would actually be happy with, because I, you know, for much of my life was extremely introverted, and I learned to balance that out. But I was talking to the Imam the other night about it. I said, you know, when I first started practicing Islam at a young age, the idea of being a part of communal worship was not something I liked very much. And so I'm kind of getting lazy with this, but the Imam is going to hear that, so I can't slack off. But, you know, I'm enjoying not having to deal with all the congregational challenges of, you know, the person parked bad in the parking lot, or somebody is, you know, chit-chatting while the Imam is speaking, you know. So it's kind of nice, because it's almost like worship in a place where you're already comfortable, if that makes sense.
Well, and Adam, one of the things that I think is to add on to that is that I know that in all three of our faith traditions, to some degree, and in Judaism, the way that it's stated is that to save a life is the most important act that we can do. And I know that we all have that in common. Most of us are not called on a daily basis to save people's lives. Some of us most certainly are, and with so much gratitude for the medical professionals and the first responders who do and are putting themselves on the line. But for most of us, this idea of the most important thing is to save a life, for most of us, this is theory, right? Right now, we're being told by science that we all have the opportunity to participate in putting this value into practice. And when we say the most important thing is to save a life, and in order to do that, you're going to have to sacrifice a little bit. We're actually being given this opportunity to show that we mean it, that we live our religious values. Sometimes that means by staying in and personal sacrifice. And sometimes, just as there are people who they get all of their energy from going into the public worship sphere, and so for them, going to worship in public is not at all a sacrifice, right? It's this fabulous moment. Just as there are introverts who go out into that space and it's like, oh, I'm doing this because I have to. This is the right thing to do. It's the right thing to do. Not saying that they don't want to be there, but just in terms of the examples that you were giving about frustrations or whatever, and not just introverts. So this is an opportunity to see exactly the reverse of that, right? Okay, I kind of enjoy being home a little bit. Wow, that's a bonus. Do I feel guilty about that? Maybe we should just say, no, this is what I'm doing right now to save a life. Sure. And others are sacrificing or suffering more for it. But what an opportunity we have to listen to science right now.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah, well said. Imam, how is the Muslim community dealing with this? I mean, we already mentioned that, you know, we're already in the midst of the month of Ramadan, and the idea of virtual Friday prayers doesn't really work very well, and you can't really you can't do a virtual fast breaking meal at night unless you're just everyone's eating while they're in front of their laptop or something. But, you know, so how is the community dealing with this on an emotional level right now?
Well, from the sermons that we give every Friday, basically, of course, radically changed because of this, because of the coronavirus. The message is to really connect with God on a personal level, and the message is perhaps we're trying to find the blessings or the divine wisdom in everything that happens around us. My messages have been just about that. This is an intimate Ramadan. This is a time to worship God alone without any outside interferences. And it's fascinating because Rabbi Harris and Reverend Fleck were talking about services online, we had the opportunity to see other people's services as well. So I have some congregants, he said, I heard a Jewish service and they were talking just like you about, you know, Benjamin, and about, you know, Jacob and his son being in the well, and then Jonah being in the belly of the fish alone. And, you know, and I said, I think we're talking like them, they're not talking like us, but for the most part, you know, we're just trying to, you know, some people probably never heard a Jewish service before or a Christian service before, and perhaps they cannot relate to the commonality of the human within all these tags that we have, and all these common stories that we have. Our congregation is very, very connected to the mosque. We pray 5 times a day, and you know, in our literature, praying in the mosque is more virtuous. And I have to communicate to my congregation that if you have been forced, if you've been doing something on a regular basis and you've been forced to stop, like we have been forced to stop, the reward's still there. Enjoy the time with your family, enjoy the time with your, at home, and perhaps try to find, you know, try to tune away all these outside voices, and maybe the only voice you could hear is that of God. My biggest fear was, my biggest concern was to make sure, you know, all the mosques are following the same procedures and closing, and you know, some of them wanted to open and some of them did not want to open, but for the most part, people are following our lead, and they're closing and keeping people safe. I've visited a lot of doctors from a distance. You know, our congregation have a lot of doctors. I visited seniors. I went to their homes. They found it, I find it very refreshing to go visit some of our seniors within our community, knocking on their door, maybe leaving them a plant outside, and from a distance say hello. Visited some of my students. So I think on a human level, our congregation is adjusting to the idea, submitting. That's, after all, that's what Muslim means, is to submitting and surrender, and worshiping God, not necessarily in the mosque, but by helping in the food pantry, and by fixing dinner, and by, you know, tell them to be nice to those now what we call essential people. And they make the least amount of money, you know, be nice to those people, and so on, and try to find the divine in every person that we serve.
Wow, beautiful, beautiful. And Reverend Fleck, do you have anything you'd like to add about how the Christian community has been, you know, handling the lack of being able to go to the church and church life and congregational worship and such?
I don't know if I have anything to add. You know, the rabbi and the imam covered the gamut of human emotion when it comes to our worship spaces, and how various.
It has to be a rabbi, imam, and a preacher. It has to be. That's the way it goes. Imam and a preacher through.
All right. So the rabbi said, the rabbi and the imam and the preacher all agree, right? I don't have a punchline for you except to say that we agree.
We agree that the bar should be closed.
And that the bar should be closed.
No, they should continue to deliver. Oh, wait, no, that doesn't work for the imam. Sorry.
Oh my God. Adam, no, I have nothing else to add, especially now, because we're just going down a hole. And although I enjoy that, I figure that y'all might want to talk about some more stuff.
Okay,
I blame the imam. It's his
it's the imam and his bad jokes. I agree.
Always blamed.
All right. So, you know, given the circumstances, people are going to naturally be asking the question, why is this happening? And especially in this circumstance, I mean, something is happening to us that's not necessarily happening to us. And what I mean by that is, even given the fact that more than 1 million people in the United States have been diagnosed with COVID-19, it still is a small number when you look at the total US population. So it's happening to us as a total population where all these restrictions are coming down and we're feeling the impact, but we're not all getting sick at once. So that being said, surely some people may ask the question, why would God, a loving and merciful God, the creator of all creation, why would God allow such a thing to happen? And if there are people out there asking that question and wondering that, could you give some insight as to how each of your traditions would respond? And Imam, I'm looking at you on my screen now, so maybe we'll start with you this time.
Well, from the Muslim perspective, there's a divine wisdom behind everything. Our limited vision, our limited knowledge, human limited vision, human limited knowledge is not capable of fathoming the divine wisdom behind everything. This Friday, my sermon is about the divine wisdom of, perhaps there was just a small reminder for the entire humanity that we should stop killing each other, we stop the wars. Perhaps the divine is the rich and the poor is being affected, the rich and the wealthy being affected, those people who are powerful, and people who are weak, everybody's being affected, that perhaps we are one human family. Perhaps materialism that has taken over our life is now we're focusing more towards spirituality and connecting with one another. So there's always a divine wisdom behind everything. And the Quran is full of stories about divine wisdom. Joseph was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, went to jail, but he came out ready to lead because he knows what oppression is. He knows what slavery is. He knows what a prison industry is. So he came out ready to lead and be a person that bring things forward. And the Prophet said something beautiful. Sometimes you have to go backward in order to focus and go straight to the target.
Well said. Thank you. Thank you. Reverend Fleck?
I think it's only natural that question comes up, for people of faith. I think that's common question that people ask in the midst of grief in general, whether it's a cancer diagnosis or the loss of a loved one, or in this case, a pandemic. It's a natural question to ask, why did God let this happen? Or some people even say, why did God do this? And those are really hard questions. In the Christian tradition, you will find a variety of answers to that. Some traditions will answer with absolute certainty as to what God is doing, and God has a plan and all of that. My tradition, like the Imam, likes to focus on the divine mystery of the work of God. It's not for us to know the answers. And that is one of the hardest things as a human being, is to relinquish that control, which is a challenge we're facing during the time of COVID, is we have to relinquish control. And as humans, we're not good at doing that. And part of understanding and recognizing divine mystery and the mysteriousness of the divine is relinquishing control over having to have all the answers. And that's not something that comes easily to human beings. For myself, I'm taking this time to focus on what this is showing me. Because as the Imam said, we're seeing a whole new world. And what is that trying to teach us? Right now, it's showing me a lot of gaps in the world. It's showing me a lot of people who don't have health care, who don't have access to health coverage. It's showing us these essential workers who are literally the link between us and food to sustain our lives, and between us and having, you know, first responders care for us, you know, all of these things that maybe we're invisible. Maybe we've gone to the grocery store and seen the people stocking the shelves and not, you know, that it's basically been an invisibility in our life, but now that's being highlighted. And for me, that's helping me understand, okay, well, we need to be out there advocating for pay raises for people who make abysmal, you know, salaries or hourly rates, making minimum wage, who are literally working to keep us alive during this time. That's teaching me that we need to talk about, you know, equitable healthcare and equitable health access. We need to be looking at things like food deserts and how that genuinely is affecting our communities, because it is, especially right now. Right. So for me, this frame and this time is less about why is God letting this happen, and is more about what is God showing me through this once in a century experience that no one alive today has experienced before. Right. We're experiencing it, and what are we learning from it? How are we going to be better people of faith as a result of what we are seeing and doing during this time? And how do we foster that? How do we grow into those roots of what is inevitably going to be a new experience? It's very important. But it's a vital question. It's one that's very natural to be asked. And so I thank you for bringing it up.
Thank you for that insight there. That was...
and that's going to be in my sermon. I'm just writing everything she said.
Imam,
you can have it, Imam. You got it.
Rabbi Harris, what from the Jewish tradition, what would you say to that question?
Well, as Reverend Fleck said, there are going to be many different perspectives from within the Jewish tradition. So a couple of things that I focus on. One thing that I think about is eternity. And this is a very, very small period of time in the scope of eternity. For those of us who have loved ones who are sick, for those who have loved ones who have died related to COVID, I'm sure each day feels like its own eternity. It's a different kind of grief and sadness. So we're constantly balancing what happens to me in my world as a personal experience with eternity, and how do I fit into eternity? There's a reading in our prayer book that says, what happened once upon a time happens all the time. And in the scope of eternity, what happened once upon a time happens all the time, but the difference is in this moment, as Reverend Fleck said, a once in 100 years experience for us, God willing. In this moment, we get to see the way that things are different this time than they were last time. In real time, we are watching revelation happen. And what I mean by that is that I'm of the belief that revelation continues to happen from God to human beings. And that revelation looks like science. So that what somebody tomorrow wakes up and puts together that feels like a miracle is only a miracle to the degree of education that they have received, experience they have had, and the shoulders of the people that they stand on who came before them, not to mention collaboration and working together. Why can we hopefully have a vaccine for COVID-19 in the next however many, 18 months or whatever it's going to be? How can we have that in that span of time when we couldn't have it yesterday? And to me, that is partnership with God and revelation and action. Wow. So we have to also remember that we don't live in paradise. From a Jewish perspective, we don't live in what would be called messianic times. From a Jewish perspective, our Messiah, from our belief, has not come. and we are in an imperfect world. So the question, why does God let this happen, or why would God make this happen, is not, to me, remembering that's not the world that we're living in. We're living in the imperfect world where our souls and our being is given the opportunity to learn and to grow and to change, so that in 100 years from now, when something that we can't imagine happens, they look back on us in the way that we look back on 1918 and say, oh, look at the things that they didn't know. Look at the things that they did know. Look at how far we've come in the span of eternity. We are having an opportunity to see revelation.
Wow, beautiful. Very inspirational. The answer from all three of you has been a lot of insight into the way we can look at this from different perspectives. And I hope everyone who's viewing this has benefited from those responses as much as I have. I want to thank all of you for being on with us. We're getting close to the end of time, so I thought it'd be good that we end with just a brief 60 seconds bit of advice or inspiration. Where do we go from here? And I know asking three individuals that are used to preaching to congregations to say something in only 60 seconds is not an easy thing, because usually when I tell the Imam you have 2 minutes, he takes 20 minutes. But maybe we can start with you, Rabbi Harris, and then Reverend Fleck, and then Imam and Chasti. Just what would be your bit of advice to not just the Jewish community, but to Oklahomans in general? Where do we go from here?
Wear your mask. Call somebody that you have not seen just to say, I'm thinking about you. And the Psalm, this is the day that God has made. We will be happy and rejoice in it.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you. Reverend Fleck.
I would say, just because I've seen a lot of not questioning but hurt on social media, I would just like to say that the holy has not left you. You have not been left without holiness alongside of you during this time. So easy to forget. And also, church is not a building. We preach it all the time, but now we're living it. So remember that church is not the building with the steeple and the pews. The church is you. You are walking around being the church. So live according to that by doing all the things the rabbi just mentioned, by reaching out to your neighbors, and most especially showing care and love to every single person. You are holy, you are worthy, and God is with you.
Beautiful, beautiful. And something tells me that the Imam is going to steal that also, and he's going to use it. The mosque is not, the mosque is you. You are the mosque. Yeah, something like that. I know it's going to happen. I'll let you know when that does happen. Imam, 60 seconds. What would be your bit of advice to your fellow Oklahomans?
Don't concentrate on the closed doors. Look at all these other doors that have opened for you. This is an opportunity that God is speaking to us to bring out our potential. Out of the worst calamities, a lot of blessing come out of it. So find your blessings, find your path, and follow it.
Beautifully said. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you to our special guest speakers for being with us tonight. On behalf of the Oklahoma State University Religious Studies Department, we appreciate you being on with us. And I'd like to turn it back over to the head of the Religious Studies Department, Dr. Lawrence Pasternak, for any final words.
Well, I'd like to say thank you as well to all of our speakers. And, one thought that I have as to kind of the meaning that one could see in all of this is that there's a kind of blessing in being able to take on other people's suffering, that, somebody who has the strength to do so, right? It's, that they're fortunate. And so there's 1 million cases of COVID in the United States, and there's 300 million people suffering. And so just, all of us who are suffering, bear in mind that we're taking on this burden together. And I think another message is that we are all in it together. And, and so if we want to say what can we learn from all of this, is that, you know, often we think about our own private home as the place for our egos, right? It's where we have our big screen TVs and where we have, you know, our sense of our own kind of sense of success in life. And so, you know, instead of that house being a kind of trophy to one's success, you know, our house is, for some people, they feel like it's their prison, but right now, but at the same time, you know, by being at home is the way in which, you know, we are now part of a community. It's ironic, right? That normally the house is where we retreat from that. But being at home right now is the way in which we work together and we are together to move forward. That's I guess my final thought on the matter. And so once again, thank you all. And this recording will be posted on the ostate.tv, and I hope many people appreciate it. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.